Hello and welcome back to the Sleepy Historian. I'm so glad you could join me tonight. The day is ending, the world outside is growing quiet, and it's the perfect time to let our thoughts drift back into the past. Find a comfortable spot, perhaps with a warm drink, and let the noise of the modern world fade away. Tonight, we are going to explore a place of immense scale and profound silence, a place that stood as the heart of its community, the medieval cathedral. By day, we know it as a bustling center of life, filled with the murmur of prayer, the shuffle of feet on stone, and the blaze of light through stained glass. But what happened when the sun went down? What secrets did the great church hold in the deep, quiet hours of the night? Did you know that these sacred spaces were far from empty or silent after sunset? In fact, they were often buzzing with a unique, nocturnal life of their own. A life of whispered chants, lonely patrols, and flickering shadows. So, settle in, and let's journey back in time together to spend a night inside the stone walls of a medieval cathedral. And if you enjoy these quiet explorations of the past, do consider subscribing. It helps our little corner of history continue to grow. The transformation began at dusk, with the final prayers of the day. As the last rays of sunlight slanted through the high clerestory windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the nave, the service of vespers, or evening prayer, would draw to a close. The choir's voices, which had filled the cavernous space with psalms and hymns, would fall silent, the final note hanging in the air for a moment before dissolving into the vastness above. This was the signal the day was done. Now the cathedral had to be secured, both physically and spiritually, from the world outside. This solemn duty fell to a man known as the sacristan, or sometimes the verger. He was not a priest, but a layman entrusted with the care of the church's fabric and its treasures. He was the keeper of the keys, a man who knew the cathedral not just as a house of God, but as a living, breathing building with its own peculiar habits and sounds. His first task was to ensure all the day's visitors had departed. He would walk the aisles, his footsteps echoing in the growing emptiness, his eyes scanning the deep shadows behind pillars and within side chapels for anyone who might have lingered. Once satisfied the great church was empty of the public, the ritual of closing would commence. The main doors of a cathedral were colossal structures of oak and iron, immensely heavy and built to impress and protect. Closing them was not a simple task. The sacristan, perhaps with an assistant, would have to lean his entire body weight into the task, the wood groaning in protest as it moved across the stone floor. Finally, with a deep, resonant boom that vibrated through the entire building, the doors would meet. The great iron bolts would be shot across, the heavy bars lowered into their brackets, and the massive key, a complex piece of medieval ironwork, would be turned in the lock. Clank, thud, silence. In that moment, the cathedral was sealed. It became an island, a fortress of faith cut off from the teeming, chaotic, and often dangerous medieval city sleeping outside its walls. The sounds of the street, the rumble of a cart, a distant shout, the barking of a dog were suddenly muffled, distant, and unreal. Inside, a new kind of quiet descended. It was not an empty silence, but a heavy, ancient one, thick with the prayers of generations. The air, once warmed by the press of bodies, began to cool rapidly, the immense thermal mass of the stone pulling the heat away, leaving a distinct, cellar-like chill. The great transition was complete. The cathedral of the day was gone, and the cathedral of the night had begun its long, quiet watch. But the cathedral was never plunged into absolute darkness. To the medieval mind, light was a powerful symbol of Christ's presence, a ward against the spiritual and physical dangers that lurked in the shadows. And so, a few stubborn flames always held the darkness at bay. The most important of these was the sanctuary lamp. This was a single candle or oil lamp, often housed in a vessel of polished brass or silver, which hung on a long chain before the high altar. This was the spiritual heart of the cathedral. Its flame was never allowed to go out, for it symbolized the eternal presence of God within the consecrated space. It was a constant, unwavering point of light in the immense darkness of the nave, a tiny star burning in a stone universe. Its gentle, flickering glow would catch the gilded edges of the altarpiece, create soft, moving highlights on the polished marble of a bishop's tomb, and cast a warm, reassuring pool of light on the steps of the sanctuary. Beyond this central flame, other, smaller lights would dot the interior. Wealthy patrons and guilds maintained their own side chapels, dedicated to specific saints, and they would have paid for candles to be kept burning through the night before the statue or relic of their patron. Pious individuals, seeking favor or giving thanks, would have left their own smaller votive candles at various shrines, each one a tiny, flickering testament to a personal prayer. These scattered lights created a landscape of light and shadow that was constantly in motion. The slightest draught, slipping through a crack in a window or down from the triforium gallery, would set the flames dancing. Shadows would leap and writhe, making a familiar stone carving of an angel seem to momentarily turn its head, or the effigy of a knight seem to stir on his tomb. Maintaining these lights was a crucial and constant nocturnal task. It often fell to a junior cleric or a designated candle keeper. Every few hours, he would have to do his rounds. Carrying a small stool and a pair of wick trimmers, he would move silently through the church, his own lantern casting a bouncing circle of light ahead of him. He would trim the wicks of the candles to prevent them from smoking or burning too quickly, top up the oil in the lamps, and replace any that were about to gutter out. It was a quiet, meditative, but vital job. A single moment of carelessness, a single overturned candle, could lead to a catastrophic fire that could consume the entire roof and gut the building in a matter of hours, a fate that befell many great churches. So he moved with care and precision, his small, diligent actions ensuring that the sacred light, in all its symbolic and practical importance, continued its vigil through the longest and darkest of nights. The most profound activity of the cathedral night was not seen, but heard. For the spiritual purpose of the cathedral did not cease with the setting of the sun. It was, in essence, a great engine of prayer, and that engine ran continuously, 24 hours a day. This ceaseless round of worship was known as the Liturgy of the Hours, or the Divine Office, a practice rooted in ancient monastic tradition. The clergy attached to the cathedral, known as canons, were obligated to perform this cycle of prayer. While the laity slept, the canons' night was deliberately broken. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, in the deepest, coldest, and most silent part of the night, a bell would begin to toll from the cathedral's tower. This was the signal for matins, the longest and most important of the nocturnal services. The canons would rise from their simple beds in their houses within the cathedral close, the walled precinct surrounding the main church. They would dress quickly in the cold, donning their heavy woolen choir robes, and make their way through the dark, moonlit cloisters. Their footsteps would crunch on the gravel paths or tap softly on the stone walkways, the only sound in the sleeping world. They would enter the cathedral not through the main public doors, but through a smaller, private entrance that led directly into the choir, the area of the church behind the high altar reserved for the clergy. The choir was a church within a church, lined with intricately carved wooden stalls. Here, the canons would take their assigned places. There were no bright lights, only a few candles on lecterns to illuminate the large, handwritten vellum pages of their antiphonary and psalters. The precentor or choir master would give a signal, and a single, unaccompanied voice would rise into the cold air, chanting the opening verse of a psalm. Then the other side of the choir would respond, their voices joining in a chorus of plain chant. For the next 2 hours or more, this call and response would continue, filling the vast, dark space with the timeless words of the Psalms, interspersed with hymns, readings from the scriptures, and prayers. The acoustics of the empty cathedral were perfect. Every note, Every syllable would resonate against the stone vaults and pillars, creating a sound that was both immense and deeply intimate. It was a sound that was not intended for any human audience. It was a direct offering to God, a belief that even while the world slept, humanity's praise and petitions must never cease. It was a grueling duty, especially in the depths of winter when the cold in the unheated stone building was so intense that the cannon's breath would plume in the candlelight. Yet it was the very heart of the cathedral's existence. As matins concluded, it would be followed immediately by the office of lauds, the service of praise for the coming dawn. As the canons chanted the final psalms of lauds, the first, faintest hint of grey light would be starting to appear in the eastern windows, a sign that their long, sacred vigil was almost over, and the light of a new day was about to conquer the darkness once more. While the canons were the spiritual heart of the nocturnal cathedral, they were not its only human occupants. The building was far too large and valuable to be left entirely to prayer and candlelight. It required a guardian, a physical protector. This role was filled by the custos asterisk, or watchman. The watchman was a layman, a tough and reliable man who was, for all intents and purposes, the cathedral's night watch. His job was one of immense responsibility and profound loneliness. While the canons were together in the choir, the watchman was usually alone, making his slow, methodical patrols through the silent, echoing spaces. He might have a small room, a cell-like chamber tucked away high up in the triforium gallery, the arched walkway above the main aisles, or perhaps in a small gatehouse attached to the main building. This was his home and his post. Armed with a lantern and a large ring of iron keys, he would walk the cathedral's perimeter. He would check the locks on the lesser doors, ensure that the collection boxes hadn't been tampered with, and look for any signs of trouble. His greatest fear was fire. He would sniff the air for the slightest trace of smoke, his eyes scanning the forest of timber beams in the roof above for any telltale glow. He was also on the lookout for intruders. Thieves might try to break in to steal the precious silver chalices, the jeweled reliquaries, or the rich tapestries. The homeless might seek a sheltered place to sleep, and while a compassionate watchman might turn a blind eye on a bitter night, he was also wary of the fire risk they posed. His footsteps would be the only human sound in the nave for hours on end, a slow, steady rhythm on the flagstones. He would know every creak and groan of the building, every drip of water, every rustle of a nesting bird. He was not, however, entirely alone. He shared his vigil with the cathedral's other silent guardians, the cats. Nearly every medieval cathedral had a population of resident felines. They were not pets in the modern sense, but essential members of the staff. Their job was to control the population of mice and rats, which could wreak havoc on the cathedral's treasures. Rodents could chew through precious vestments woven with gold thread, nor on the vellum pages of priceless illuminated manuscripts stored in the library, and contaminate the grain and wine stored for the Eucharist or as part of the church's tithes. The cats were the silent, efficient pest control, and they had the run of the place at night, slinking through the shadows, their eyes gleaming in the lantern light. On rare occasions, another human might be present. A special penitent, a nobleman or a devout pilgrim, might be granted permission to spend the night in prayer before a particularly important shrine, their solitary vigil a testament to their deep faith. But for the most part, it was just the watchmen, the cats, and the immense, sleeping building. The cathedral at night was a world of sound. In the absence of the daytime clamor, the building itself seemed to come alive, speaking in a language all its own. For someone like the watchman, who spent countless hours within its walls, these sounds became a familiar, almost comforting symphony. The most dominant sounds came from the structure itself. The vast timber roof, a complex web of beams and trusses high above the stone vaulting, was constantly adjusting to changes in temperature and humidity. It would groan and creak like the hull of a great ship at sea, the ancient wood settling with deep, resonant sighs. On windy nights, the sound was even more dramatic. The wind would howl around the towers and buttresses outside, finding its way through the tiny gaps in the leadwork of the stained glass windows. This would create a range of eerie sounds inside: a low, mournful whistle in the nave, a high-pitched shriek in the belfry, and a rattling of any window panes that were not perfectly secure. Water, too, played its part in the nocturnal soundscape. Even on a dry night, condensation would form on the cold stone of the walls and ceiling, gathering, and then dripping with a slow, steady rhythm onto the floor below. Each drop would land with a distinct, echoing plink, a sound that measured the passing of the silent hours. After a rainstorm, the sound would be amplified, with gurgles and trickles coming from the stone gutters and downspouts as they channeled the water away from the roof. Then there were the sounds of its small, living inhabitants. The rustle and scuttling of a mouse in the choir stalls, often followed by the soft, padded footfalls of a hunting cat. The flutter of a bird that had become trapped inside, its wings beating against the high, dark windows in a desperate attempt to find the sky. And of course, there was the single most important sound, the one that connected the cathedral to the sleeping city around it: the great bell in the tower. A separate bell ringer, or sometimes the watchman himself, would be responsible for marking the hours. Pulling on the heavy, greasy rope, he would send a deep, sonorous toll rolling out over the rooftops. For the people of the city, huddled in their beds, this sound was a comfort and a guide. It marked the passage of a night that was otherwise dark and measureless. It was a reminder that the church was watching over them. That time was still moving forward, and that God was in his heaven. For the watchman inside, the vibration of the bell would travel down through the stone of the tower and into the very floor beneath his feet, a powerful, physical reminder of his duty and his place at the center of the sleeping world. From the outside, the nocturnal cathedral was a completely different entity from its daytime self. During the day, it was the city's focal point, a landmark of pale stone and sparkling glass. But at night, it transformed into a vast, dark mass, a mountain of human endeavor silhouetted against the moon and the stars. In an age before electric light pollution, the night sky was a brilliant spectacle, and the cathedral's towers and spires seemed to claw at the heavens, blacker than the sky itself. There were no floodlights to illuminate its intricate carvings or its flying buttresses. Its beauty was one of pure form and imposing presence. It was a shape of immense power and stability, dominating the low, huddled skyline of timber-framed houses and narrow, winding streets. For a traveler approaching the city at night, the cathedral's silhouette would be the first thing they saw, a welcome sign that they were nearing civilization and safety. For the city's inhabitants, its dark shape was a constant, reassuring presence on the edge of their vision. It was a symbol of order in a world that often felt chaotic, a promise of divine protection against the terrors of the night, both real and imagined. Occasionally, a tiny pinprick of light might be visible. It could be the lantern of the watchman as he passed by a high window on his rounds, a fleeting, moving star in the great stone facade. Or, if one were standing in just the right place, one might be able to see the faint, warm glow of the sanctuary lamp, filtered through the deep, unreadable colors of a stained glass window. This single, tiny light served as a powerful reminder that even in the darkest hour, the heart of the cathedral was still beating, its vigil unbroken. The building was not dead or empty, it was merely sleeping, gathering its strength for the coming day. Its presence was felt as much as it was seen. It was the anchor of the community, the silent, brooding guardian that watched over its people as they slept, its great stone bulk a testament to a faith that was as solid and enduring as the rock from which it was built. It was the city's soul, rendered in stone and shadow, waiting patiently for the return of the sun. To truly understand the cathedral at night, we must step into the medieval mind, a mind that did not see the world as we do. For them, the night was not simply the absence of day. It was a different realm, a time when the veil between the physical and spiritual worlds grew thin. And the cathedral, the holiest place in the city, became a focal point for this nocturnal tension. It was a fortress of God, but it was a fortress besieged by the forces of darkness. The night was the domain of demons, evil spirits, and the devil himself. People believed these entities were most active after sunset, and they would have seen the deep, impenetrable shadows within the cathedral as perfect hiding places for such malevolent beings. The watchman's lonely patrol was not just a guard against thieves, it was a vigil against the forces of evil. Every strange noise, every flicker of a shadow could be interpreted as a sign of a demonic presence. The very architecture of the cathedral played into these fears. The gargoyles and grotesques that adorned the exterior, designed to ward off evil spirits by day, could seem terrifyingly alive at night. In the flickering moonlight, a stone demon perched on a parapet might seem to grin or shift its position. The watchman, glancing up, might have to cross himself and whisper a prayer for protection. The interior was no less intimidating. The cathedral was also a vast necropolis. Bishops, nobles, and wealthy merchants were buried beneath the flagstones of the floor, their effigies sleeping in stone on top of their tombs. At night, it was easy to believe that the spirits of the dead did not rest easy. Folktales and local legends abounded with stories of ghostly processions of monks, of the spectre of a murdered bishop returning to his throne, or the faint sound of a spectral choir. The watchman would have known all these stories. His job required him to walk directly over the graves of the long dead, and it would have taken a man of immense courage or deep, unshakable faith not to feel a prickle of fear. The constant prayers of the canons during the divine office were seen as a form of spiritual warfare. Their chanted psalms, a holy weapon that pushed back against the encroaching darkness and kept the evil forces at bay. The flickering sanctuary lamp was not just a symbol, it was a beacon of divine power, a circle of safety in a space that, for all its holiness, was on the front line of the nightly battle between good and evil. The cathedral at night was therefore a place of profound paradox, the safest, most sacred place in the city, and yet also the most spiritually perilous. The long vigil of the night always, eventually, came to an end. The first sign of the coming dawn was subtle. It was not a sight, but a change in the quality of the darkness. The absolute, impenetrable black of the deep night would soften, almost imperceptibly, into a deep grey. This was the moment the canons in the choir would be chanting lauds, the prayers of praise for the new day. And as their voices filled the church, the light they were praising began to manifest. The great stained glass windows, which had been nothing but black, leaden grids all night, began their slow transformation. At first, they were just pale, ghostly shapes. Then, as the sun crested the horizon, the first direct rays of light would strike the eastern windows, high above the main altar. Suddenly, miraculously, they would ignite with color. A single beam of ruby red or sapphire blue would slash across the dark interior, illuminating a pillar or a patch of the stone floor. It was a moment of pure magic, a daily resurrection. As the sun climbed higher, more and more windows would catch the light, and the interior of the cathedral would be flooded with shifting patterns of colored light. The dust motes, invisible all night, would now dance in the brilliant shafts of sun, turning the air into a sparkling, jeweled haze. This triumphant return of light and color was the signal for the cathedral to reawaken. The sacristan, who had locked the doors many hours before, would return. He would walk to the great west doors, his footsteps now seeming smaller, less significant in the vast, light-filled space. He would pull back the heavy iron bolts, their screeching protest a stark contrast to the quiet chants of the night. The great key would turn in the lock, and with a groan, one of the massive doors would swing inward. A rush of cool, fresh morning air would sweep into the cathedral, carrying with it the smells of the waking city. Wood smoke from cooking fires, the scent of baking bread, the damp smell of the earth. This air would mingle with the cathedral's own unique nocturnal scent of cold stone, beeswax, and the lingering, faint sweetness of old incense. The transition was complete. The nocturnal world of shadows, whispers, and lonely vigils was over. The first worshippers of the day would begin to arrive, their faces illuminated by the morning sun, ready to begin the daily cycle of prayer and life once more. The cathedral of the night had done its duty, and now, bathed in light, the cathedral of the day was ready to receive its people. So, the medieval cathedral at night was not an empty, forgotten shell. It was a place with its own distinct rhythm, its own population, and its own profound purpose. It was a space that never truly slept. From the solemn closing of the doors to their joyful reopening at dawn, the great church was a hive of quiet, purposeful activity. It was a place of unceasing prayer, where the voices of canons sliced through the darkest hours, ensuring a constant connection between heaven and earth. It was a place of lonely vigilance, where a solitary watchman and his feline companions guarded its physical and spiritual treasures against the dangers of the night. It was a living building that groaned and sighed in the wind, its sounds telling the story of its age and strength. And it was a battleground, where the flickering candlelight and the power of faith held the deep-seated fears of a supernatural world at bay. The next time you stand in one of these magnificent buildings, feel the cool air and look up into the vaulted heights. Take a moment to imagine it after the sun has set. Picture the single, steady flame of the sanctuary lamp. Hear the faint echo of a footstep in a distant aisle, and listen for the ghostly sound of a midnight choir. You'll find that the silence is not empty, but filled with the echoes of centuries of nocturnal devotion. Until next time, may your nights be peaceful and your dreams be filled with the quiet echoes of history. Sleep well.